A long, strong psoas won't fix your lower back pain. I know there's a lot of content out there that says it will. It may well be useful and it may have an indirect effect, but it won't directly fix your lower back pain. And what we're going to do in this tutorial is first of all try and understand where your back pain is coming from, and then we're going to talk about how the psoas fits into that. If you are struggling with lower back pain, then just click the link below, go through to my How to Overcome Lower Back Pain consultation and coaching, and we can get you set up with the questionnaires. The information will come through to me. I will then get you booked in for your online consultation, and then we'll go through all the consultation. We'll set you up on the online course, and we'll get your rehab program started with the 2 weeks of online support afterwards. So again, if you're struggling with lower back pain, just click the link below and we'll get you started. First of all, we'll just quickly talk about what the psoas is and where it is. The psoas, if you can imagine, you've got your spine and then your pelvis, and then your legs. So you've got your spine here, pelvis here, and then you've got your two legs. Your psoas muscle basically comes off the lumbar vertebra, goes down through your pelvis and joins on to the inside of the leg. There's a lot of exercises to start with which are given to try and lengthen the psoas. So something, you may have some dumbbells in your hands, you may be asked to put your hands behind your head in a bodyweight position, but you'll come right down into this sort of position. Now what that's doing, that's lengthening that psoas muscle. So what's happening here is your hip is going into sort of a hyperextension because you're going right back into this position. What you can have is your spine going into extension as well, which we'll talk about in a later part, how that can have a negative impact. But essentially the psoas is the muscle that goes off the spine, through the pelvis and joins in to the top of the leg. When we go into that lunge position, we are lengthening it. When we come into this position, we are shortening it, or as some people will describe, we are trying to strengthen it. But one of the roles of the psoas is to lift the knee up. So the psoas only needs to be as strong as it is to lift that knee up. It may need endurance to do it a lot, but the actual strength of it is to lift your knee up. So if you've got a lot of weight on there, then it's not necessarily counterproductive, but it's not an efficient use of time and resources to be strengthening a muscle that only needs to be that strong. In part two, we're going to start looking at triggers. Now, the first trigger that we're going to do, what I should say is, what is a trigger? Well, the trigger of lower back pain is the thing that we need to remove to fix your lower back pain. So the long, strong psoas isn't really a trigger. It can be, but it might not be. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a disc bulge. So a disc bulge is where we have two vertebrae and a disc in between. Then what's basically happened, there is a fluid in that disc, and that migrates its way back to the back of the disc, and then it bulges. And then where it bulges, it touches and irritates a nerve, and that creates our lower back pain. Now, if we just lengthen our psoas for to try and overcome that lower back pain, it's not going to work, because the trigger is a disc bulge coming out the back. So how we overcome a disc bulge is by maintaining a more neutral posture, because if we find out that spine flexion is the trigger for the disc bulging, and then it irritates the spine or irritates the nerve and creates the pain, we need to remove that spine flexion. So we need to come into a more neutral posture. So we haven't talked about the psoas yet. We haven't even gone into any postures that really involve the psoas. All we talked about is just maintaining this neutral posture to manage how the disc mechanics work. Because as soon as you flex the spine and you get sort of an open back end of it and a closed front end of it, it's going to push all that fluid to the back. So how we manage that trigger is by maintaining that neutral posture. If it means going into a lift, it's getting good hip flexion. It may mean bracing the torso. So these are the things that are going to fix your lower back pain. It's certainly going to reduce it. What we can then start to talk about is the psoas. Now, the psoas is useful for good hip range of movement. So it may be that we need to increase the range of movement, not directly to manage the position of the spine, which is the reduction of the trigger. It may be that we need to lengthen the spine. We may need to come into this type of movement or exercise or whatever it might be, just to get some extra length so we can then get down into a better hip hinge, so we can maintain the spine, which is what's creating and directly affecting the posture of the spine, which is directly affecting the disc bulging if we go into flexion. So that's where it can have its use, and it's a much more indirect, because it's a few pieces removed from the actual mechanism, which is maintaining the posture. It just means when we come into this hinge, or when we come into this type of position to lift, we've got the hip range of movement, and we can do that by having a longer psoas. The second trigger we're going to talk about is the extension. So this could be the facet joints on the back of the vertebra. So if you put your finger on your spine, you can feel all the lumpy bits that go up your back. They're known as spinous processes that come off the back of the spine. Now, if we go to the ones at the side, which you can't really feel, but if we go to the transverse processes, between each vertebra, so if I put my thumb together like that, so there's my vertebra, my fists, and then my thumbs are the spinous or the transverse processes. So as my spine moves, these facet joints slide over each other. Now, if we go into a lot of extension, so hyperextend, then these joints can get compressed together. Then that can create some inflammation, some impingement, and then that can start to create pain. So the extension could be a trigger of your lower back pain. So again, when we're building a rehab program, we have to take into consideration that posture, that extension posture. We have to remove it, eliminate it, modify it, whatever we need to do to reduce the pain. What we can then start to do, again, if we take the long, strong psoas, again, it can have its uses. But what we have to remember is if we're using a position or an exercise like this, because we're in such extension and we've got a short and tight psoas, what can happen is we can go into that extension because we haven't got the length there. If we go into the extension, we're going to keep compressing the facet joints together, which could actually be aggravating the pain. So we've been told that it fixes our lower back pain, but when in actual fact, if we understand the mechanics of a certain type of lower back pain, which someone could have, then it's actually doing the reverse if we're not performing that exercise correctly. Because the only way of understanding that is if we can come into this position, maintain this neutral posture. So again, we're not compressing those facet joints, and then we come down in and we can get that deep with that neutral posture. But we have to understand that first. First of all, we have to understand the mechanics of your lower back pain. We have to understand the triggers. Then we have to understand the mechanics of your hip and of your spine, and can you get into those positions? Because what it may mean is that we come into a much less aggressive type of stretch, and we just come down onto one knee. We're not going into huge amounts of extension because I've got my knee directly below my hip, and then what I can do is sort of come into this position and just stretch through here, because for some people that might be enough. And then we need to obviously grade it and build it up. We may not even need to get into a position like this. So again, it's a redundant exercise. It may be useful for certain people, but for most people it may well just be redundant. But unfortunately, we're being told that an exercise like this is going to fix lower back pain. Where it has its place in an indirect fashion, it's not necessarily a direct fixer of lower back pain. So to quickly summarise, a long, strong psoas won't fix your lower back pain. It may have indirect effects. The key factor to fixing lower back pain is understanding and then reducing, modifying or eliminating your triggers. So we need to understand what triggers you have. Is it spine flexion? Is it extension? Is it fatigue? Is it compression? There's all these different types of things that it could be, but we have to understand what they are. Now, where it does have an effect in so much as indirect effects is it can help with extra range of movement. If you do have to lift, if you do need good hip range of movement, having a longer psoas is going to help with that, because we can get down into these positions and maintain that key factor, which is the posture of the spine. If we then talk about extension being the trigger, again, if we go into exercises like this, it could be actually causing the problem because it's sending you into spinal extension. So it's very much, number one, understand your triggers. Number two, understand how you're going to modify them, eliminate them, or reduce them. And then finally, start to build in the necessary exercises that you need. And if you do need psoas that needs greater range of movement, then by all means, use an exercise like that, or a sort of a downgraded version of it, as the one I showed you earlier, down on one knee with your arm up above your head. So again, if you need help with lower back pain, if you're struggling with it, if you've been trying exercises, they're not working, click the link below, fill out the questionnaires, get booked in for the consultation, and we'll get you your rehab program.